excited to welcome Emma Bloomberg, who is the founder and CEO of Murmuration, which was launched in 2014, which provides data and analytics, proprietary technology, strategic guidance, and programmatic support to help build political power and marshal support to improve our public schools. She was previously the chief of staff at the Robin Hood Foundation and sits on the board of the Bloomberg Family Foundation, the Robin Hood Foundation, the KIPP Foundation, New Classrooms, and Leadership for Educational Equity. So we're really excited. It's going to be a fireside chat. She's going to be joined by Marcus Brauchli, who's the managing partner at North Base Media. So we're really excited to bring them out. So here to talk about the stakes of the upcoming political cycle and as it relates to education, please welcome Marcus and Emma.
So good afternoon. It's my first time at one of these events. What an incredible gathering. I want to say thank you first to GSV and ASU for having us here. Been a really inspiring just first day, the kind of people we've been meeting. I met a member of the Chicago School Board who went through the public schools there as a young migrant from Mexico and is now on the board helping oversee a $10 billion budget. I talked to the president of a small historically Black college in Texas who's using technology to try and reimagine how you can reach larger groups of people and give more people a chance to get higher education. But like so much else in today's world, there's often a limiting factor in what happens in American education, and that particularly treacherous gating factor is politics. And navigating politics in America, in today's polarized America, is, as you all know, strange. And we're incredibly fortunate to have somebody with us today who's made it her mission to try to figure out how to navigate that, Emma. She's founder of Murmuration, and I think maybe we should start off, since I know this is also your first time here, telling people a little bit about what you are doing.
Absolutely. Again, I'll just echo you. Thank you so much to ASU+GSV for giving me this opportunity. It is a real honor to be here at this conference. It's my first time, and to be in this room with all of you. Thank you all for listening. So Murmuration, you heard a little bit about us, but we are a 501c3 and 501c4 organization that works with community-based organizations across the country who are trying to mobilize people in communities around public K-12 education. So what that looks like in practice, they do organizing work, they do advocacy work, they do electoral work. We provide them with the technology, the data, the analytics, the strategic supports, the research that they need to be able to do all that work as effectively as possible. The goal really was to fill gaps, right? There are organizations across the country who believe deeply that we need to change the political conversation around education, but who didn't have access to technology data or to the supports that they would need to be able to actually avail themselves of that. On the research side, which is sort of one of the reasons that we're here, we think about our research and trying to fill that gap in two ways. We have an in-house data science team that does applied analytics work. We have a national polling project, for those of you who do know Murmuration, that is sort of focused on model building, on turnout scores that are local and sort of tailored to school board level, and then on things like randomized control trials on what tactics work so that when small community-based organizations have finite budgets, they know whether or not to blow the whole thing on digital or to door knock. And that's sort of part of our mission, is really just to make them as efficient as possible in how they spend their limited resources. And then the second half of our research is really around public opinion, and trying to make sure that our organizations know more than just what they read in the paper or what they hear from the limited number of people that they're able to talk to, that they really know where the conversation is around public K-12 education across the country. And so we actually released a benchmark poll today, murmuration.org/benchmark, if you want to actually dig into the crosstabs. But really just to do that, to make sure that they understand this is not all about what you hear in the media. There are parents, there are voters out there who care deeply about public K-12 and how are they thinking about it. So we know how to think about building long-term sustainable support.
So your organization recently completed a bunch of surveys on American attitudes toward K-12 education. I saw an excellent article on the 74 today about it, for those who want to look it up. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're finding. And in particular, one of the things I found most interesting, as I think the journalists at the 74 did, is sort of the generational cleavages in how people perceive education?
Yeah. The benchmark polling I find particularly interesting because it does help you to sort of cut through the partisanship that is really what we see so much of in public K-12. One of the reasons that we did this poll in the first place is that we're seeing school boards and schools themselves under attack in a way that we really have never seen. School board activism is through the roof, and the conversations are very much around culture war issues, not around what's happening in classrooms. And so we're trying to help organizations understand if that is really where people are, or if there is a deeper conversation to be had around what's happening in K-12 public education. So in this benchmark poll, I think the findings that were sort of most salient for me, one, support for change in public education crosses party lines. It is not actually a partisan issue. It doesn't correlate in any way to partisanship. There is a deep-seated belief that we should not be trying to go back to the way things were pre-pandemic, but that actually we should be, like, now is the moment for change. And when you talk to voters about sort of how important an issue education should be in voting and in sort of thinking about government, about 53% of people, I think, said that it was a very important issue. But when you ask them to think about it in the context of the future of their community and of the future of this country, that goes up to about 63, 64%. So a real understanding that investment in public K-12 is the future of this country. But the piece you were getting at on the generational divide, we really found that for Gen Z and millennial voters, there is an incredible amount of common ground in terms of how they look at K-12 public education. One, they believe deeply that it is an issue that we need to be investing more in as a country. They think our current system is not providing equitable opportunities. They believe that school choice is actually something that should be embraced at a pretty high percentage and across party lines. And the real interesting thing there on the generational gap is if you then dig into the parties, in the Democratic Party, there's a 46-point gap between how supportive Gen Z and millennial voters are of choice for parents and boomers and the silent generation. So that distinction, this is not a Democrat versus Republican thing, it is a younger voters versus younger potential voters, because they don't always vote, versus older voters. And the same thing when we talked about, we asked questions around teaching history in ways that address the systemic racism in this country, and including sort of potentially making white students uncomfortable with their privilege in those conversations. Across party lines, Gen Zs and millennial voters want us to be having those conversations. And on the Republican side, that gap is about 33 points between the younger group and the boomers and silent generation.
So given those findings, I mean, clearly education is a wedge issue, at least in the eyes of some politicians. Mm-hmm. And we've seen just in the last year, obviously you made reference to the Florida proposals to not have people feel uncomfortable in discussing historical issues. Florida also has proposals around how sexuality is taught. In Colorado, my home state, I see that the Douglas County School Board fired a superintendent because he was trying to enforce equity policies that the previous board had approved. There was talk about whether the Virginia election was swayed because of the talk of CRT. So I guess my question is, given that there's this consensus, or there seems to be a consensus, first of all, a larger consensus around the need for high-quality education, and then more specifically, a view among younger groups that these kinds of issues should be transcended, what can people do, or what should be happening politically to try to get past this so that the focus can be on education reform, and the focus can be on, I hate to say those aren't matters of substance, but maybe they're not exactly matters of substance in quite the way I think a lot of the proponents of those issues think they are.
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot in that question. Thank you. For me, the main takeaway on this is that we live in a moment now where all of a sudden people know what school boards are. They used to not. A colleague of mine who's on the other side of this wall right now, and I used to joke, wouldn't it be great if we could get education to be one of the top 5 issues that people would vote on? And then all of a sudden we woke up one day and it was. And that, while it creates massive opportunity, also creates massive risk. Because what we're seeing is really small segments of the population sort of trying to capture this moment and basically saying, oh, okay, there are these things called school boards. No one votes for them. No one really pays attention. We can hit these hot button culture war issues, get a handful of people really riled up, and get them to vote our people into office, and then use that as a stepping stone, right? I mean, a number of organizations have cropped up where they've been very explicit that this is their mission, this is what they are planning on doing in this cycle and beyond. So I guess what I would say is there is a very real, very loud contingent talking about these issues that you raise. But that's the wrong conversation, I think, to really be having. We did polling and focus groups around that Virginia gubernatorial, and everyone tried to sort of write that off as, oh, well, it was about CRT. And when you really talked to parents, it wasn't, right? It was, here on the one hand, a candidate who is acknowledging that the last 2 years have been really hard for me as a parent with homeschooling and going back and forth in hybrid, who is acknowledging that we need to be doing more, who is acknowledging that transparency with parents about what we're teaching is maybe something that we should continue to build on. Parents felt heard in a very different way, and it wasn't, there were Democrats and independents who voted for Youngkin, not because they were anti, quote unquote, CRT, but because they felt like here was someone who was having a conversation about maybe trying to move the needle forward for their kids. Now, of course, so far, it's unclear that he has done anything to really live up to what they were hoping for, but that's really where we need to be focused. It's thinking about what is it exactly that voters are asking for, and trying to fill that void so that it's not just a conversation about culture wars. It's actually a conversation about content.
So what do they want? I mean, if these hot button issues are ephemeral and useful wedge issues for politicians, when you say there's a consensus among Americans for higher quality education, what does that mean? Are they looking for people? They're looking for their kids to graduate and be able to find jobs? Are they thinking about the country in sort of a globally competitive position? What is it that they're focused on when you get granular?
So, as you might imagine, among most voters, there is not broad-based consensus on policies because they're not in the weeds like that, right? Where there is broad-based consensus is they want their schools to be preparing kids not just to get through school, but to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that this country can afford once they graduate, right? So whether that looks like college or it looks like career, they feel like the current K-12 system is not actually setting their kids up for success, and they're seeing this in kids not actually being able to get high-paying jobs, right? And kids ending up coming home. There's broad-based consensus that schools need to be safe, that they need to teach things like civic engagement and financial literacy, that they need to be addressing right now in particular the massive learning loss from the last 2 years, and that they need to be addressing the mental health crisis. There's clear consensus among parents that they are hoping their schools will do more to support their kids on that front.
You glancingly mentioned school choice before, and I want to go back to that for a second. You all may know Emma's father also had a hand in education. He was mayor of New York City, and he was known, I would say, as a strong advocate for charter schools. I wonder if you could talk about well, first of all, does your organization reflect his view on that, and how do you see Americans' views on choice morphing?
I love my father very much. We do share a last name. That does not mean that we are aligned on all policies all the time. But putting aside my own personal beliefs, I'll start the question by just drilling in a little bit on Murmuration, which is we don't actually take a policy platform. So we do work with lots of organizations who believe deeply in choice, but we also work with lots of organizations that are working on other issues around K-12. Our feeling is we provide community-based organizations with the tools they need to do their work. They should decide what policies are right for their communities. And that also is why we are a multi-partisan organization, right? Because we need to be able to work with organizations who are in purple districts, in blue districts, in red districts. All kids deserve access to high-quality public K-12. And if we had any sort of a partisan lens to our work, we wouldn't actually be able to help them to realize that longer-term vision. I do think that we're at an interesting moment. School choice over the last couple of months, even year, in part because of the pandemic, I think has been increasingly ascendant. There's something like 24 states right now that are considering bills. Yes, there's a whole conversation happening at the federal level that is counter to all of this, and I know a number of you in the room have been working really hard on that, and thank you. But at a local level, there's just more interest in it, and part of that was parents not being able to send their kids back to their local district school and looking for options, and realizing that their options were limited. I am also, as I said, really interested in this new polling data that we have around Gen Z and choice. It tends to be that people who identify as very progressive tend to not be pro-choice, and we're not really seeing that play out in this younger group. We're also seeing that they are both pro-choice and pro-union, and I think many in the choice space have tried to create, and it has been perpetuated, I think, in large part by the unions, this sort of false dichotomy between unions and choice, right? That you can't be for both, and the younger generation is basically saying that's not true. We can be supportive of our teachers, and we can also provide great options, great public options for parents, and that's what we should be focused on. So how we figure out how to harness that is really the next step.
Do you see in your research and in talking to people, we mentioned a bunch of volatile issues in the last 6 or 8 months. Now we're talking about choice and how that plays out. We've just come out of the pandemic. Technology is taking an increasingly large role in education. I wonder if you sort of look forward, do you see other issues emerging that are going to become politically important in either, I guess, the near-term elections, the primaries are coming up this summer and the midterms this fall, but around local elections in the coming year? Do you see anything on the horizon that isn't being focused on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, as always, healthcare and the economy are number one and number two, the things that people are focusing on. Where
but within education,
right? But where we are trying to figure out how to focus is you take those local elections and you think, well, I need to figure out how to turn out voters around the issue of K-12, which is one of their priority issues, but there are these other priority issues that are sort of hovering around them, and how do we focus the conversation? And a big piece of that is focusing on the hyper-local races. I don't actually think, I think at the school board level, the focus really needs to be on addressing learning loss right now. That's sort of the major priority for parents, and on really how we're going to think about what the system should look like over time. And if we can try to make that the conversation and move it away from book burning, it'll be a little more productive.
Couldn't agree more. Emma, thank you so much for being here, and good luck with all your work.
Thank you.